we need local communities to demand more of our food systems, but we need them to participate with educators, with researchers, and particularly with policymakers to make those food systems better.
Hi, welcome to back to our podcast, the Zero Hunger Project. I'm your host, Suman Roy,
I'm Stacey O'Neill.
and today we're going to talk about a topic from policy to plate, building equitable food systems. And we've heard a lot about food systems lately. We have been talking about that. And it is really fascinating when we talk about food system versus agri-food system. We heard about that recently. And now we're going to talk about actual the food system. And who else than one of my very good friends, Dr. Cecilia Rocha. And Stacey, you're gonna talk a little bit about her?
I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Roca to the podcast. She's a professor at the school, or newly retired, I should say, I guess, professor at the School of Nutrition at TMU, and a globally recognized scholar in the fields of food policy, food security, and sustainable development. Over the last 2 decades, Cecilia's research has focused on how local food systems and participatory governance can be harnessed to combat hunger and promote social justice, particularly in urban settings. We love that. Her work with the Belo Horizonte food security program in Brazil is frequently cited as a groundbreaking model of municipal governance that successfully integrated food access with economic and social development. This program's policies include regulating food prices, supporting local farmers, and creating food banks in popular restaurants, demonstrating that hunger is not inevitable but a solvable issue through political will and coordinated action. Oh, you need that on a big banner.
I know, eh?
Cecilia's ongoing research explores how food systems around the world can become more equitable, sustainable, and resilient, especially in the face of global crises like climate change, economic instability, and public health emergencies. She continues to advocate for community based food governance, where local voices and cultural food practices shape policies that impact access to nutritious food. What an amazing bio. What incredible work you've been doing. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate being invited to the podcast and hopefully to contribute to this project on Zero Hunger.
Absolutely. I think, Cecilia, you just retired and you had so many better things to do, but I'm glad that you're here with us because the work of Zero Hunger never ends.
No, you never retire from that.
No, I think I'll try to continue doing a little bit of my part as long as I can, certainly.
I'm so looking forward to it. So, Cecilia, you've described food systems as inherently political. How can local communities take back control of their food access, and what models have shown success in this?
So when we say that food and food systems are political, in my view, that means that what we have today in terms of, and in the future, in terms of producing, distributing, and consuming food, depends on the forces in society. That's what we mean by political. And so our food systems are shaped by those forms, by those forces, by what we have in production, distribution, and consumption. So we have to ask the questions. The food systems that we have, are they healthy? Are they sustainable? Are they making people sick? Or are they contributing to health? Are they polluting our environment? Do we have access to wholesome foods? So, those are all questions that we keep on asking about the type of food systems that we have. And the answers that we provide to those questions are political, depend on those forces that shape those systems. So, and they are all, we should see it, when we say systems as well, we should think about all aspects of that system, from production, we have to think about the workers in producing food and the people that bring this food to us. And we have to talk about restaurants. We have to talk about food retailers. And we have to talk about uh, what choices we make as consumers and buying food and preparing food. So it is a very broad view. And all of those, everything that shapes the system will be political because of the different forces that are impacting that. Now, you you asked about local communities and what local communities can do and how local communities, in a way, participate in shaping those food systems. I believe that there is a very important role for communities, for local communities, in shaping our food systems, particularly in mobilizing and demanding what type of food systems do we want. So local communities can do a lot, but I don't think they can do it by themselves. So I think this is, for me, an important message from my studies, my research in the area of food systems, is that we need local communities. We need mobilization of local communities. We need local communities to demand more of our food systems, but we need them to participate with educators, with researchers, and particularly with policymakers to make those food systems better. So I don't know if I have answered the question.
So, how do rather cultural food practices factor into the design of equitable food policy? And why is that important for long-term food security?
I have been part of the Center for Studies in Food Security at the Toronto Metropolitan University. And the center is 30 years old now. And the way we have defined food security, it's not just in terms of having food and access to food. So the way that the Center for Studies in Food Security has defined food security, it is food security exists when we achieve five conditions, and we talk about this as the 5 A's of food security. So I'll just go over the 5 A's to explain why cultural food and food cultures are so important. So the 5 A's of food security that we have determined at the center. First is the availability. So we need sufficient food for all people. So we need food that is available to all people at all times. But it's not enough to have food available. People need to access that food. So accessibility is the second A. And that's not only physical accessibility. So, for example, you cannot have food deserts where people cannot access that food physically. It's difficult to access. But most of all, in our food systems, the main problem of accessibility is economic, because food is available through markets. We need money, we need income to access food. So accessibility is the second very important A of food security. We also talk about adequacy, the third A, in the sense that the food that is available, that people can access, the food has to be nutritious and safe and produced in environmentally sustainable ways. So that's what we define as adequate food for food security. The fourth A, and that's the one that will go to the need for cultural foods and the place of communities in food security, is acceptability. So this fourth A, acceptability, it stands for we need to have food. People need to access food, safe food, but also food that is acceptable, that is produced and obtained in a ways that do not compromise people's dignity, self-respect, and human rights. And culture is a human right. So food, as part of that culture, need to be respected. People need to have access to food that's not only safe, affordable, produced in environmentally sustainable ways, but that feed their souls, feed their culture. So that's the acceptability part. And finally, the fifth A, just to complete the five A's of food security, is agency. And that's all the policies, processes that enable food security. And that, again, we find the role of communities very important because they are the ones that will demand what type of systems we have, what kind of food security we want. So, cultural food practices, as part of that acceptability, becomes very important for food security. Respecting people's rights, respecting their cultural rights, but also because we believe that food security depends on preserving diversity, or preserving the diversity of foods everywhere in the world. So that is it's connected to that preservation of cultures as well.
With the rise of globalization, globalized food systems, what are some of the overlooked consequences on local food sovereignty and community resilience? What are you seeing are some of the kind of negative byproducts of that?
I think that's actually the segue that you have to that previous question, which is the idea of diversity. I think globalized food systems tend to emphasize monoculture, for example, and decreases that diversity. Not only cultural diversity, but diversity of species, of types of foods, and that can be not only, let's say, boring from from a cultural perspective, but it could be dangerous because the risks of eliminating a monoculture system is very high, and to preserve food sovereignty in that way will also preserve that diversity that we may want to have in the future. So there is some risk involved in globalized food systems if we end up depending on too much monoculture and mass production in a way. So we preserving cultural foods preserve diversity and some kind of resilience for our food systems.
The byproduct of that also is assuming that one culture is better than all the other
Hmm.
cultures. I mean, that's a very slippery slope.
And that's we're going back to human rights. I mean, you do have those cultural rights that must be preserved, and food is an important part of that.
So, Cecilia, tell us a little bit about your research project at Belo Horizonte. And I know we have been working for years around the Toronto Food Policy Council. Uh, what is some learnings that cities like Toronto, New York, all of us we can get from the your experience at Belo Horizonte?
So Belo Horizonte is a city in Brazil, in the uh, center east of Brazil. And it emerged as a very interesting example of what I was talking about, the collaboration among communities and policymakers and the educators. So creating a local food system that brought in a number of those different parts. And it started in the early 90s when the new mayor was elected to that city. And they created a system that has been very successful in developing local programs and policies for food security. Now, I'm always cautious about talking about Belo Horizonte as a model because, of course, cities in the world, they have their own economy, their own social conditions, their own political contexts. So it's not a model in the sense that you can take whatever they have there and apply everywhere else, or being Toronto or New York. However, when you talk about lessons, I try to take three main lessons out of that, which are general lessons, but maybe can be applied in other contexts. So the first one, again, is the importance of policy. And as you can see from my answers, I'm a huge believer in policy. Now, and that's because I think that to preserve and to improve food security, whatever initiatives you have, whatever community initiatives you have, they must be elevated to the level of policy to be preserved and to even increase. Because community projects, they tend to be fragile sometimes and vulnerable. And if you don't institutionalize some of the benefits, some of the gains, some of the processes that you developed at the community level, they may disappear. So I believe that the development of policy is important in preserving the some of the positive examples that we have at community levels. So, for example, I think the importance of communities to lobby governments to develop policies that or initiatives that they have seen are positive. It's very important. Be them, for example, urban agriculture or school meals programs or whatever, different programs that need the support of policies. In the case of Belo Horizonte, I'll just mention a few programs that have been very successful and very resilient because they became part of the policy, official policy in the city. So you have urban agriculture very well established as being supported by the local government. Farmers markets, very, very well supported by policy in the city. The school meals programs, which is a national program in Brazil. So it exists throughout the country, but it has a very particular support in the city. In Brazil, you have a lot of cities supporting food banks. So you have public food banks as well to have food assistance. A very important program that I always like to talk about is what they call the popular restaurant, which is a cafeteria style restaurant that sells subsidized meals, and everybody can eat in those restaurants. So those are things that they had the origin at community level, but then they were elevated to the policy level. So they have been able to survive for many years and actually grow through the many years of those programs. So the first lesson I would say is the importance of policy. The second one is um, what are the principles? What are the principles that you want to follow uh, behind, to sustain those policies and implementing those policies. So, in the case of Belo Horizonte, there are four main principles that I think are very important. The first one again, is the right to food, which is in the Brazilian constitution. And it just says that everybody has a right to adequate food, and governments need to do whatever they can to sustain, to maintain that right. So the right to food is an important principle in that. The second principle in the case of the city of Belo Horizonte is social justice. That is, that everything that they are doing in terms of food security is in terms of favoring marginalized communities, low income groups. Of course, those policies and programs can have other objectives, but the main one for them is what they call social justice. The third principle that those policies have is universality, meaning that as much as possible, not all programs are universal, but as much as possible, they should be universal. That is, available to everyone and anyone in the city. So, for example, the popular restaurant, which sells subsidized meals, is available to anybody. They don't say only low income people can benefit from this, only low income people can come here. No, no, it's available to everybody. So when you go to the popular restaurant, you see students and you see older adults, people that maybe they live alone, they don't have appropriate kitchen to cook. They are all there. They all pay the same price. So it's a universal program. The fourth one is just the principle of food quality and safety, let's say, and this awareness that the government programs should not be seen as lower quality or unsafe in any way. So I think that this has been a very important principle in the programs of Belo Horizonte. And I would end with what I would say is the third lesson for what I've seen from the example of Belo Horizonte, which is through the policies, not to forget about the communities, meaning the participation of communities. So have mechanisms for participation of community members, civil society, in the development and implementation of those policies. So, for example, the most pertinent, I guess, example of that is what is called there the school food councils. So the government is funding school meals programs, and the programs are implemented in the schools by the city. In the case of Belo Horizonte, there is a separate department for food security that is responsible for that. But in other cities, it can be the Department or Secretary of Education that implements the programs. But all school meals programs in any city in Brazil must have a school meals council. And that council has a member of the government, but also civil society members, including parents of the school kids, people that work in cooking the food, or farmers that supply the food. So those councils are responsible for monitoring the programs. So they are very aware of how the programs are implemented and how the programs are doing. So in that way, the community participates in a formal way, in an institutionalized way of implementing the policies and the programs. So those are some of the lessons, let's say, that I would emphasize that comes out of this Belo Horizonte.
I mean, it's
So
incredibly
valuable.
inspiring. Like the fact that the country is locked in general to the idea that this is incredibly important and needs to be dealt with at every level of government, within the community. When we're talking about a lot of these problems, as a person who's not involved in this in terms of food security, I'm not a food security expert. It's overwhelming for the average person to try and figure out if this is even possible, if we can even do something like that. How do we overcome all of these seemingly massive problems? And to speak
Mm.
to somebody who's been involved in a place that seems to have figured it out actually kind of makes me feel a little relieved. To be honest, like, it's kind of emotional because we're talking about all of these big and they feel like big kind of existential problems that we're having. And there
Yeah.
are people in the world that are like, no, we got this. It's good. It's fine. We'll be able to figure it
So
out.
I want to get a little more inspired with this question to you. Can you tell us a little bit about the Fome Zero? Is that what that project
Fome Zero.
was?
Yeah.
Fome Zero? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Maybe a little bit of the history in terms of putting all this together, because the programs in Belo Horizonte started in the 90s with the local government that came to power and decided to make food security the center of its policy. And that government then created this specialized department in the city, the Department for Food Security. And that department had a fabulous group that created a number of those programs. Okay. Now, some of those programs already existed, such as the school meals program, which is a national program. However, the city of Belo Horizonte then said, well, we want this to be better because this, is a national program, but nobody really.
I love these people. I love that they're like, that's great, but we want to make it better. I'm here for all of it.
It's because the programs were, for example, I mentioned the principle of good food and, the programs having good and safe food. That was the thing, because a lot of the government programs, what we're always seeing as the idea of poor food for poor people, that's this idea that it doesn't have to be of high quality or whatever, because it's going to go for people that don't have any choice. And that group that came to Belo Horizonte at that time said, no, we want high quality food, good food, because people deserve that. The idea of having, as much as possible, universal programs was because they were very aware that the more of, let's say, middle class they could gather in the programs, the more resilient those programs would be. So there were also some strategy in that. But anyway, this was in the 90s. Then in the 2000s, in 2003, uh, that same party came to power. That was the Workers' Party, came to power for the first time in 2003. And then they had food security again at the center of the policy of the programs that then they would have at the national level. And that's when they created the zero hunger strategy, the Fome Zero, the zero hunger strategy, with a lot of the same principles that we had at the city level, but then now at the national level. So the zero hunger strategy became a national strategy. And a lot of the people that used to work in Belo Horizonte went to the national level to implement the zero hunger strategy. So the mayor, the person that was mayor of Belo Horizonte in the 90s became the minister for, for social development at the end of hunger. The minister was called Social Development and the End of Hunger at the national level. And that was the zero hunger strategy. And the zero hunger strategy had impacted the food system as a whole, not only food consumption, but production. So they had programs uh, to support small family farmers. They expanded the popular restaurant program. They improved the school meals program, which in 2009 had new legislation and encouraged local food production, local food procurement. So that was the zero hunger. So it was at the national level.
Wow, there's so much to learn from Cecilia. Like, I am dumbfounded. I
Well,
don't even know
I mean, I
where
think
to
the thing
start.
is that in these conversations that we're having, I've been feeling as an everyday sort of layperson to food security, I've been feeling a little overwhelmed with the doomsday aspect of all of this, and that it just seems to be one problem on top of another on top of another. And this conversation has really heartened me because I mean, it's one city in Brazil that seems to have sorted themselves out and gotten their food security problem under control. But it's really kind of laid a blueprint for what other countries and cities need to do in order to kind of fix our own problems, culturally
Yeah.
speaking.
So I'm going to give a very shameless plug here
Yeah.
that if you are able to pick this book up, the
Will it
Zero
tell us
Hunger
what to do?
Project, not only tell us what to do, but there is the Brazil story here.
It's so
There is
fascinating.
a lot of different stories from around the world
Yeah.
on who's successfully done, or also there are stories who fail,
Yeah.
and we can learn from all of that. But what really captured me is the 5 A's of food security that she
Hmm.
talked about. I thought that was brilliant.
I was trying to guess the A's.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Could
got
you rightly guess?
Well, not all of them. I got agency.
Okay.
It's my favorite A word of all time.
Sounds good.
I got accessibility
Okay.
because that's obviously got to be a huge issue.
Huge, especially
I
here.
got availability, and then the other two I didn't get.
But I think when you talk about accessibility uh, for our audience,
Hmm.
I'm sure you heard Dr. Cecilia Rocha talk about what accessibility in this context really mean.
Yeah.
It is very different from how we generally hear the topic.
Yes.
So I think that's important.
And to be fair, in terms of rating how well I did on my A's, I didn't get that definition of
Got
availability.
it.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if I get partial marks just for coming up
Yeah,
with the word.
maybe.
Okay, I'll take them.
So, yeah, just to recap: availability, accessibility, adequacy, acceptability, and agency.
Yeah, I mean,
These were the
adequacy,
five
I
A's.
totally understand. Acceptability is a huge one,
Yes,
particularly when it comes to cultural relativity, social justice, all of the things that I love. So
100%.
I am thrilled to hear that that's something that is being taken into consideration.
Absolutely. But we are not done yet.
No, we're not.
We are not letting Dr. Rocha go so soon. We are going to be back next week with the next episode, continuing this conversation with Dr.
It's
Rocha.
so good. Come back.
In the meantime, please, if you like it, subscribe, like, give us your feedback, ask us your questions.
Hmm.
The Zero Hunger Project. Let's continue this conversation, and together we will end hunger.